Welcome to Building Healthy Relationships, the 4 Habits podcast, helping you enjoy better harmony at home, thrive at work, and win at life. Here are your hosts, Dr. Andrea and John Taylor-Cummings, recognized authorities on the subjects of improving work relationships and cultures, as well as couple and home relationships.
Well, hello and a warm welcome to all our guests or audiences around the world. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time zone you're checking in from or watching this on replay. Great to have you. Really looking forward to the conversation today. We have none other than Professor Stephan Meier with us all the way from Columbia University in New York. Welcome, Stephan.
Thank you so much for having me on the show, Andrea and John.
We're looking forward to diving in. But before we do, as our audience knows, we want to give you due recognition. So John's going to share a bit of the bio.
Always my privilege and pleasure to do this. So Professor Dr. Stephan Meier is one of the world's leading experts at the intersection of behavioral economics, corporate strategy, and the future of work. He is currently the James P. Gorman Professor of Business Strategy and the chair of the Management Division at Columbia Business School in New York City. He is the author of the book, The Employee Advantage. We're going to be talking about that here today. Oh, we've got a copy to show you. Look at this. Copy book being read, mid-reading as well. The Employee Advantage, How Putting Workers First Helps Businesses Thrive. He is the award-winning teacher at Columbia, and every year hundreds of students learn from him about the human side of strategy in Columbia's MBA and executive education programs. So previously he worked as the first senior economist at the Center for Behavioral Economics and Decision-Making at the Federal Reserve Bank, and he lives in New York City with his family. In his free time, and I'll be checking this out online, he creates Lego stop-motion movies related to his book and research. So we want to find out a bit about those as well. So welcome, Stephan. Great to have you with us.
Thank you so much for this very nice introduction.
Amazing.
Great to be here.
So good to have you. So before we dive into the kind of focus of the work you have now and the book and all the detail there, give us a little bit of the backstory. What took you into this place of the intersection between strategy, behavioral economics, and the future of work?
Thank you so much. Yeah, sure. So I study human behavior since my PhD, which is a long time ago, and I'm not going to tell you because it was reveal my age. But I came down in. But I came down to New York. I'm from Switzerland, to the US. I'm from Switzerland originally in 2005. Joined the Federal Reserve Bank there and joined Columbia in 2008. And then I was teaching here business strategy. I was teaching about, how should Walmart do better? What should Disney do? Should PepsiCo spin off their snack divisions from their beverage? Stuff like that. And so I will go in the classroom and teach about strategy. And then I go to my office and do research about human behavior. And I kept those almost separate most of the time. So I didn't blend them much. I would go into the classroom and think about the customer and whatever. And then I go back to the office and think what motivates people at work? How can we think about incentives and whatever? And it took me to the pandemic where I kept it basically separate. And then during the pandemic, a couple of things happened. So one is I thought that the pandemic really put a stark spotlight on things that don't work well. In general, in society, revealed inequalities that were always there, but it became very, very obvious, salient at that point. And the same with organization, that something is just not working well in organization, and then led to people, resigning and expressing even more why they're unhappy and disengaged. So that's one thing that happened. The other thing that happened, I became the chair of the division here. So while before I never actually managed any people, my PhD students and some of my research assistants, and then suddenly there was a larger group of people that I had to manage, and that's the second one I thought that's actually not that easy to do. And then I started to combine kind of all of those things with an elective that I designed on the future of work, and started to think much more about how important are humans actually in business strategy? Now humans, not the customers, but the employees. What motivates them? How can we think about humanizing work? How can we deal with that? I think almost like engagement pandemic, or disengagement pandemic that is not going on since the pandemic only. I mean, actually going on for a longer time.
A long time, yeah.
And how can we change that? And then over the years now, while I was writing the book, but also teaching like many executives on the topic of the future of work, I started to become much more passionate about actually changing some mindsets in how to think about work, how to think about humans at work, and doing a better job in putting employees first. And not because of an altruistic reason, although I also think it's the right thing to do.
Yeah.
But I want to make the point that, it's also actually good for business. And I think that helps for executives to be on board more. I think many executives, know that it's the right thing to do, but always thought like, in order for the business to thrive, we actually have to squeeze labor. We have to, cut as much as possible. And they think in this either or, either the company or the employees.
Yeah.
And so I tried to change that.
Yeah. And that point of mindset is just so, as you use the word salient, so relevant, so important, because mindset should have been challenged since the pandemic. But we notice that there is this, it's like we're slipping back into the way we used to do things, and the way we used to do things didn't necessarily work. So tell us the figures. Tell us why it's good for business to be employee-centric, and then we'll go to some of the other hows to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I often do in the book and in general to talk about the business purpose, talk about customers for a second. Because when you think about customer centricity, and that is something that was not always the case. Before, organizations were like product centric. They designed, they told their engineering team, so design the best fridge with all the bells and whistles that you can think of. And then they would design that fridge, and then the marketing team would like sell that fridge. Go to the customers, are like, you need all those buttons. And then customer centricity was like the other way around. It's like, maybe we should ask them how many buttons they need. And when you think about Apple, who then came up with like just one button.
Yeah.
And then they're like, well, they can probably produce more than one button, and more features, but the customers actually didn't want that. Now, in order to create customer centricity, it's not about lowering the price. It's about improving the experience of the customers, and that creates value. If you're at Amazon, is a very customer-centric organization. Everything in their organization is about customers. And everybody, obviously, I've never met, I guess in the history of businesses, there was never a CEO that doesn't say customers are not important. But how Amazon is really dedicated to customer is next level. So they have, Bezos brought in important meetings, he would have an empty chair. And the empty chair was for the customer.
Oh, wow.
Because like that's the most important stakeholders that we have. Or they would have he would read customer complaints personally, and then when he saw something that was like outrageous, he would forward the email or the complaint to one of his executives with a question mark. No, thank you. No, deal with it. It was a famous, like his famous question mark emails.
Wow.
And then those executives knew like, oh, now all hands on deck. We have to fix this problem. So they're very, very dedicated. And we have to, I think, do the same for our customers. The reason being, if you look at the benefits of what that does, I think it has multiple benefits. So one is, it actually increases productivity
for the employees.
for the if you now go to the employees.
Right.
Yeah, if you improve, and again, it can't be just increasing wage, because that would be the equivalent to lowering the price.
Right.
It's like improving the experience that the employees have. That increases engagement and productivity. So cost per unit actually goes down. It decreases quit rates. People are less likely to leave. And given, the estimates of whatever, like a full-time equivalent to replace, costs, whatever, an annual wage, a couple of tens of thousands of dollars. And so it's a big saving there. It improves innovation. In a world where we always talk about like companies have to be agile, they have to pivot, they have to understand, like they have to come up with new stuff. Now, guess who's doing that? The employees are. And you actually need to give people the right environment and the right experience to be very innovative. So that's number 3. So the productivity goes up, turnover goes down, innovation goes up. The fourth is, if the employees have direct contact to the customer, having a good customer experience, you have to have happy employees. I post now often about Starbucks, who have their new CEOs, and Starbucks is struggling and he has to turn around the organization. And I think part of what Starbucks lost is kind of the vibe, the atmosphere in the coffee shop. It was like designed after Viennese coffee shop, where like it's the third place and you go there and being happy and like productive and like welcomed and the barista. But in order to do that, the baristas or the partners or whatever they call them are critically important. If the employees are not happy, they're overworked, overwhelmed by all the choices and like feel not part of the organization, the customer feels that too. And then Starbucks becomes just another place to buy coffee. And like, why would you then pay a premium for that?
Because
So
they're kind of the first in that space to create this third place. I remember I had a real bias towards Starbucks because of this home away from home experience with the coffee.
Yeah, and part of it is really like, the people who work there. I mean, if they're miserable and disgruntled, that's not pleasant. There are many miserable and disgruntled people we interact with on a daily basis. Why would I need buy my coffee there as well?
Exactly.
And so there are a lot of benefits who actually lead to, if you're employee first or like really care about the employee experience, that actually helps the bottom line of the organization as well.
That's exactly where I wanted to pick up there, actually, because the in our experience, I think as organizations have moved from, as you say, product-centric to customer-centric, those are all different things that they've tried. But I think one thing that hasn't changed is certainly CEOs have always been results-centric.
Yeah.
You've got to give me the numbers. Having happy employees is great only so far as they're delivering the numbers. If you walk into a Starbucks and it's a third place and everybody behind the till is high-fiving and everybody's happy, that's great. But if it's not translating into numbers and bottom line, then find me some unhappy employees that can give me the numbers. It's kind of how a lot of the CEOs, I think, still think out there. So it's that combination. Where's that link that how are you able to make that link for them?
That's absolutely true. I also say that often to my exec, if you want to cut costs tomorrow, start with labor. In the short term, if you want to optimize your bottom line, you fire people, you squeeze out more of worker. That's a great thing to make your quarterly number. I think it's a terrible thing.
Next quarter,
to long term. There is an interesting example, when Best Buy, like the US electronics retailer, they were in trouble. Not so surprising, basically all their competitor, like Circus City, went out of business because Amazon was killing them. Why would you go? That was the logic. Why would you go into a store and buy the TV there? I mean, what you might do is go into the store, look at the TV, and then order it on
On
Amazon.
Amazon, yeah.
So Hubert Jolly took over at Best Buy a couple of years ago, and so he was charged with the turnover of the organization, quite frankly, to save Best Buy. And he got a lot of advice from, like, cut cost. He actually wrote in a book, is like, everybody said, like, fire, or cut. And he did exactly the opposite. He said, like, no, I want to do a very human-centric turnover. I want to do a couple of things. So what he did is, like, talked to people who worked in Best Buy.
Oh,
so
no.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, what we would do with customers. There is, if you ask a marketing executive, should you ask your customer only once a year how they're doing, they would laugh. No, you need constant feedback from customers. And so why not do that with employees? So he actually he worked in a store in his first week and talked to employees and found out there are a lot of, like, stupid rules and stupid bureaucratic things that make that terrible. He also then figured out, they actually cut a lot of benefits to the employees that were critically important. Think about, like, a person who would be awesome in a Best Buy is one that is a nerd about electronics. So for some time, the longest time they had for employees, they gave them a discount if they bought an electronic in their store. That was, like, for those guys, that's their life. That was like the best thing ever. Then they could buy whatever the best, the newest hi-fi system, and then they cut this, and they were unhappy. And it was not unhappy, but it actually led to the wrong selection. If you want the right people in the store, so Hubert Jolly went back to that. They invested a lot in training, and as a result, in this human-centric turnover, they actually saved the company and made it successful. But John, to your question before, the problem is, like, some of the insights executives have at the moment is this either or. They think about either the company or the employees. And if we're all doing great, yeah, we can share a little bit with the employees. But it gets hard. We have to choose, and then we choose the shareholder value, and by squeezing more out of the employee. And that's, in my view, and what the research shows, just a very, very short term thinking. Because
especially now, because I think coming out of the pandemic, all the stories, the narratives, and the research, they show that people are much clearer on what they expect from an organization and what they're willing to kind of put up with in terms of culture and treatment. And also where they'll draw the line, either to quietly disengage or to actually leave. And we were saying on a call earlier today that companies aren't just competing for talent from other companies. They're competing for talent with employees who dare to bet on themselves and start their own company to get the flexibility that's become so important. But there's a point that you pick up on in the book with mindset, or a big theme around the mindset we inherited from Taylorism, where it was all about efficiency and, managing these micro pieces of work. And that thinking has influenced how we do management, and we need to see people to be able to control them, which goes against the whole hybrid and flexible approach, which for employees is important. But I think managers are stuck in a mindset of, I need to control to be able to deliver against my job. How do you help, or what advice are you giving to managers and leaders to help them develop a new way of thinking around management of work and control and being more human-centric?
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think the whole debate about hybrid or distributed work or remote, puts it kind of at the forefront of what is sometimes going wrong in organization. And part of it is exactly what you say, Andrea, that, it's this lack of trust that leads to this problem that we, if I don't see you in the chair, I think you're not doing your job
Yeah,
properly.
no, you're under you're at home under your duvet, right?
That's what we
Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean,
cuddle.
I had like one of my executives once, he said like, when they're at home, the employees, they go shopping. And I said, so what do you think they're doing when they're in the office?
Good question.
And it's like, well, they're working. It's like, no, they're shopping. It's called online shopping.
Exactly.
What they're doing. And so, I mean, if you don't trust your employees, you have a problem whether their buttons are in the chair in your office or somewhere else.
Good
Now,
point.
I tried to tell them a more positive story about like what I find challenging about thinking about remote work is that if you look at what motivates people, there are two motivators that go in the opposite direction of in office or not. So one is this autonomy, this desire to be empowered, to have flexibility, to choose your own, and what I call a matter of trust, because that's the flip side of it. But the second, and is, which I think you can relate very well to, is the personal interactions. The working, I call it working together works. There's something very powerful of being together with other human beings and having kind of this personal relationships. And so this makes it now difficult. If you want to maximize autonomy, then you're like, okay, everybody can choose, can work at home. I trust you. I have processes in place to make sure that, I catch the bad apples and like that we're all on the same page. But if you want to maximize working together works, maybe we should bring everybody together. And so that trade-off makes it really difficult. And so what I try to tell the executives I teach, is like, I can totally relate. I like in-person interaction a lot. I personally come to the office most of the day. Not that I interact with many people most of the day because I go to my office, but I can see really the power of in-person. But you don't need to do 40 hours of in-person a week. Or like they say, well, mentoring, is like really suffering. It's like, yeah, I mean, that's possible. But you don't do 40 hours of mentoring either. So you can actually arrange the days in a way that you think about this interpersonal relation is really important. Maybe it's okay if we like meet once a month for 3 days and like have a retreat on steroids. We have like social interactions on steroids. We really create those social interactions. That might be then enough for us to have like the next couple of days to just work remotely. And like, I don't know you, Andrea, and like we met together, we have bonding experience, we trust each other. And now we can use that in a way that I give you flexibility and I have the right flexibility to work at home or wherever I want to work. And I think I try to tell them that, but it's hard. If you look at surveys, and ask employees how productive they are at home, about 80% say they're as productive, if not more, at home.
Yeah.
And if you ask leaders what they think their employees are, there are only about 12% who think their employees are productive. So that's this trust gap.
Yeah.
But it's hard, like Amazon, who just required everybody to go back to the office 5 days a week. It's kind of shocking because the evidence is clear that it doesn't have any negative effects on performance. It has hugely positive effects on retention, in particular for certain groups.
Indeed.
Females are the most important one, but there are other minority groups that actually benefit a lot from having the flexibility, and you're losing out on that. And I personally can't see why you can't manage it in a way that we do a lot of in-person when they're like 2 days or how many days you're in the office, and then you give the flexibility and stack it that we can do the deep focus work when I actually, quite frankly, do not want to interact with anybody. I just want to focus and do the thing that I do best by myself without being disrupted.
And what's really interesting, so we've been doing some work with a number of different teams recently to try and understand the secret sauce to successful relationship, successful teams, I should say. And these teams have all kind of bubbled up in their various employee engagement surveys to the top ranking scores for engagement. And interestingly, when you drill down and you understand what's behind it, all of them still have some degree of flexibility in the way they work. None of them are at 5 days. I think most of them are at sort of 3 days.
2 or 3 days.
But what's really interesting is some of those teams have one mandatory day that everybody, like one of the teams, I'm thinking, Wednesdays, guys. In the old days, we used to say we're in 5 days. Now I'm just telling you 1 day. I want everybody in, unless you got a real good reason why you can't be here. I want everybody in this 1 day. The rest of the time flex around that. But in that 1 day, we all come, we have our team catch-ups, we have, all the kind of team stuff where we need to do that, the mentoring, etc. With the other 3 days or the other 5 days, your 3 overlap sometimes, do what you need to do when you need to do it. And that seems to be working really well because the people are happy, the management is happy because they have some level of the interaction because of the mentoring and the reasons why sometimes people need to collaborate and be together in the same space. But that sort of flexibility, I don't want to call it limited flexibility or managed flexibility, seems to be working much better than 0 time in the office or 5 days in the office.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think one has to be very intentional about the approach, which we always had to be. But now we just can't phoning it in anymore. We have to be clear, on that 1 day or 2 days, what do we do there? Why should somebody, as you said, if I make people come in, there needs to be a reason. And I think the main reason is not that the coffee is different or, they get like free snack bars, but the social interaction. So you need to stack it. I mean, obviously, if I come into the office and I'm on Zoom calls, then I'm like, what the heck? But if you come in and there is everything that we can do better in person, social interaction, team meetings, mentoring, learning, whatever it is, then I think we can really optimize what we should do in person or in the office and what we should do remotely. So I had once an executive tell me, look, he did a hybrid and he said, like, whenever they come in, they only have coffee. And I said, is that a good or a bad thing? And he said, well, that's a bad thing. It's like, no, I think that's a good thing. If they come in, obviously they should have like social interactions. That's the whole point. Why we force people to come to one place.
Yes.
I mean, there is no reason to commute. And as I said, I'm being on Zoom calls.
Yes,
all day in the office.
We like to talk about going slow to go fast. So come into the office to have those slower moments of interaction and connection and getting to know people so that when you are remote or on Zoom calls, you can whiz off an email or, just get things done quickly because you've built the rapport. But I want to go back to that point on trust.
Just quickly on that example there, I just wanted to share very quickly something we heard. In fact, a story we heard of my sister-in-law who shared this story. I'm just trying to think who it was, where actually when she would go into the office now, she'd put her out of office email message on because when she went into the office, she was always in meetings. Whereas she wouldn't really be available to respond to messages when she was in the office. Whereas when she's working from home, she was available to respond to meetings. It's like the flip mentality there. And I thought that was just so
That's
powerful.
a great story.
Good one. Yeah. He was deliberate about being present in the office and not being tied
having
to
all the coffee catch-up, all the different in-person meetings that you need to have, which are so important for getting that connection. Sorry, I know you were going a different angle there. I just wanted to...
Kind of, but I piggyback on that. I like what you said, Stephan, about being intentional, because I think one of the challenges we have, especially as leaders, is it's kind of being lazy and assuming the way things were done pre-pandemic worked. But it worked because the things we need to be intentional about kind of happen because you're in the next desk or you were able to walk the floors, whereas now we need to be far more intentional about making those social connections happen. But I wanted to go back to that point about trust, because while managers who need to see people to feel like they're in control, or presuming at work they're slacking off or going shopping, we're seeing that employees are feeling doubly pressured because they're working hard, they're working intensely, getting a lot more done in an hour or two than they would in a day at the office, but also feeling guilty that if they got up and went for a drink or got up and went for a walk, they were going to be judged as slacking off. So it's this like an extra layer of stress because of the lack of trust. Are you seeing anything around that, or any conversations with CEOs there?
Yeah, I think it's a good point where we have to also, change kind of our view of what a work day looks like.
Yeah.
And there is a very powerful, I think, but simple framework that Linda Grattan of the London Business
Yes.
School put out, like how we can constrain work, and we can constrain work in space, like at home or not, in the office, and time. The traditional office work was like 9 to 5 in the office.
Yeah.
And now we can say, okay, you can work from home, but you're working 9 to 5. Or we can say, well, or you work from home and you don't need to work 9 to 5. You can be flexible about that. Now, for certain tasks, constraining time is important. If we work together on a team and if I do something and your input is required, otherwise I'm stuck, I don't want you to be in a yoga class while I'm like working on it, and then I have to wait until you're going online. So for certain aspects, maybe constraining some time is a good idea. But for others, the whole point of working from home is to having the flexibility.
Yeah.
I mean, very few people love their coffee better no, maybe I'm wrong, but like the people want to be at home because of the flexibility. I mean, the commuting as well, but like that you can actually do, I can organize my day in a way that fits my personality and my needs.
Yes.
If you're a person who really loves working right in the morning from 6 to 8, that's like your most productive time. I'm actually a morning person, so I'm very productive in the morning. I'm not so productive in the afternoon. Other people are different. Some need a larger lunch break because they just want to work out, or they have family commitments, they want to pick up their kids and whatnot. And we should actually give that flexibility. Now I hear you that like, if we're stuck in the 9 to 5 mentality, then I'm feeling guilty if I'm like doing work before 9 and after 5, because those are kind of my productive days, times. And then I feel like I should be there from 9 to 5. Maybe I'm not being a good employee. And that just has to change. We have to think about flexibility very differently. And in the end, it's about work. We were a little fixated, not a little, a lot of fixated about the place and the time. Well, in fact, we need to get the work done.
Exactly.
And I don't really care whether you do your work in downward facing dog if you can get your work done. And I think that needs to be kind of the new mentality on like, the output should be rewarded and not the input. And whether I can get the work done in like half an hour sometimes, that's good. The other task I will have 3 hours. It's hard to know. Sometimes I'm more productive, more faster than others, and that's perfectly okay.
I want to challenge though, Stephan, though, on the what would you say, or what do you say to the CEO who pushes back and says, okay, this is all interesting, this is yeah, it sounds interesting, but we've got serious competition coming out of, I don't know, China. Let's just pick one place here, because there is an example I can remember. I remember this guy talking about him changing role, and he said, look, I was really pleased to take this new job because my work pattern went from 997 to 996. I was like, what on earth is that? He said he was working his old company was 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. 7 days a week. He was now happy to be doing 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. 6 days a week. So the CEO says, look, that's the competition that we have. These guys are working round the clock. If we don't do something here, we're saying, 5 days a week, 9 to 5. How can we compete with that? What do you say? What do you say there?
Well, I think like in India, I mean, competition is obviously important, but like I don't think the input, in how many hours you sit at the desk is making necessarily a difference in the output.
Indeed.
You can be in the office, and I mean, we've all been in places like where people are just in the office because you have to be in the office and do basically nothing in that time, or it's very badly or managed. That also leads to long hours. Like people are then waiting. John, you worked in investment bank. I mean, in investment bank, like some of those analysts, they're not actually working 12-hour days. They're like, on waiting for work to happen. That then turns out that happens then at 8 p.m. And then they have to work until like 4 a.m. in the morning. But if we manage that better, we could actually shrink the working hours, and the output could be higher. Now, I'm not saying that like necessarily everybody wants to work 9 to 5. I mean, I definitely don't work 9 to 5. I work more, and some people want to work more. That's also fine. I don't think like employee centricity means like people are not working much or are not. In fact, it's the opposite. You create an environment where people are really engaged, extremely motivated, and want to work. But this this input, like focusing on inputs, how long your butt is in the chair, that's just not a good metric for what is a good outcome and how you actually beat competition then.
And I just wanted to pick up on that actually. And what are you hearing? Because you're at the coalface, at least in regard to interacting with Gen Z. They're all you're working with students, younger people generally. I'm guessing as well. You said some executive program as well, but I'm guessing people on the MBA and so on. What are they saying in that regard in terms of output versus input?
Their expectations, you mean?
Yeah, their expectations.
I mean, it was interesting. So I had an interaction with one of my students. She's a TA who did a summer internship in investment banking this summer, and then I talked to her in the fall, and I said like, how was it? And she's like, well, it was really hard. I basically had no life. And I was like, do you go back? And she's like, absolutely not. I'm not going back. It's like interesting. So, and she's like, I'm going back to my old industry and company. And I thought like, what is that? It's like, well, that's McKinsey. Now, consulting is not known for like not working.
Easy life. No,
not at all.
And lots of travel. I've been there.
But for her, it was like, there's just a limit. And she also expressed, the inefficiencies in how the days were structured was just frustrating. And she was like, I'm happy. I mean, she's very ambitious. She's very driven. She wants to work a lot, but there's just a limit to it where she's like, I was not more productive than if I actually have some time off. And again, she doesn't go to the post office, which has 9 to 5 hours. I mean, she goes to McKinsey, which is a very demanding, not known for like short hours, a lot of traveling and whatever. But she's like, I'm happy with that.
Take that all day long.
I'm happy to do that, but I'm not doing that crazy stuff. So I think there is a change. And what I also hear, and I think Andrea, you mentioned that before, kind of the values, have to match also with the organization. Much more of my students are now, I don't want to work for that industry. I don't want to work for that company because it just doesn't square with my values. I need to get more meaning out of it. Again, my students are like business school students. They're very, very ambitious. They all want to have amazing careers, and most of them have. but they're still on the margin. They say, like, if I can choose between a company that my values are aligned, I have the right flexibility as well. I'm willing to work a lot, but it needs to match with my values in the end.
Indeed. I think one of the things that we, the corporate world, the future of work, we need to get better at is, as the way we work changes and as we become hopefully more employee-centric, we need to get better at how you actually measure and manage performance, how you manage career progression, because if people aren't in the office and they're not so visible, how do they know what their next promotion period is or what's actually required to be promoted? How do you mentoring, coaching? Any insights you have to share on the processes that need to catch up with this new way of working, with the future of work?
Yeah, I think like there are many things that are going to change. Let me mention one, or maybe two. Like, one is actually related to the autonomy piece as well, that what needs to change. If you think about, you can restrict, you can control or give a lot of autonomy. So that's like one dimension. I can either empower you or like I control. And the other dimension is like how frequently I'm involved. And then so the micromanager that we all hate, maybe worked for or have some tendencies ourselves, is the one who is frequently involved in order to control. And I think the mistake we're making is, like, if we empower and give more autonomy, we have to be less involved. And I think that's just not true. What we have to be is we have to be as, if not more, involved in order to set up empowerment for success. Think remote work again. Like, we can't just say, okay, you go work. I see you again on Wednesday or whatever, or Thursday when we meet but I see you then, and you're Monday to Thursday, you're on your own. We have to be constantly involved in order to actually give the right feedback, and in order to control, but actually set up the relationship for success. Otherwise, all the interactions are negative because there's always stuff that goes wrong. And then I'm like, dude, why did you do that? Like, you misunderstood this, or like, why did you go 2 days in that direction while I obviously wanted you to go left? And I think that's an important part of doing so. There is an interesting company in the Netherlands, Buurtzorg. They do home healthcare. So it's a company that goes to people's home and provides healthcare there. And they're one of the most innovative and successful companies in the industry. They do it for a fraction of the price and have a much higher patient satisfaction rate. And they do it with extremely autonomous teams of 12 nurses. So they work in teams of 12 nurses, and they can basically decide everything they want. How they care, what they do, who they hire, what they do. But so that's the autonomy piece. But what is a very, very important part of this puzzle is a very elaborate IT system that shares all the information of every team, you as well, the team you're in, and not in order to control, but in order to provide the teams who are now autonomous, we give enough feedback, information to make the right choices, that they can learn. It's like, oh, that didn't work so well. What did the other teams do? What can we do better? And so this constant feedback, whether it's from an IT system or from a manager or a coach, like I call those engaged coaches, it's a very important piece to make in this new world where it's more empowered. There's more autonomy, there's flatter organizational structures. What we see with technology is normally, hierarchies become flatter. It's not as hierarchical anymore. You can't do it as much top down, but you have to change the leadership style quite dramatically to set it up for success.
Indeed. Do you know, I knew we were going to enjoy this conversation, and there is so many more directions we could take this, but I'm conscious of time. I wanted to kind of wrap things up by sharing some of the stats from the book, because I had
Okay.
it where you spoke about trust, which is something that we really major on.
The currency for success at the moment.
Indeed.
Absolutely.
And our particular focus is on strengthening these relationships to unlock trust, high performance, and results. But you said in the book here on a matter of trust, studies show that people working in high trust companies had a remarkable reduction of 74% in stress levels, an impressive increase of 106% in workplace energy, 50% boost in productivity, 13% fewer instances of sick leave, a remarkable 76% increase in engagement, where some companies are struggling with 20, a 29% rise in overall life satisfaction, and a substantial 40% decrease in burnout compared to their counterparts in low trust companies. So, I mean, this book is rich with evidence and with examples and reasons to really build trust and build an employee-centric approach so that it will impact the bottom line. But
Right.
as we wrap up, Stephan, do you have one final story or an example with the kind of dollar sign impact that it made going this route that you could share?
I mean, there are many like aggregate story in terms of like, what you talked about now about this work trusting and the healthy social relationship. There is an interesting study that I also describe in the book that is about toxic work cultures, and which is a problem everywhere. And part of the toxicity is like the lack of trust or disrespect. So there was an organization in Turkey who an association at like many companies, and they took 3,000 managers, and half of them they put in a culture workshop. And what they basically did there is do three things. One is practicing respectful communications, working on the language that you use. Second is understanding and respecting differences, and I think trust is part of that. And third is learning from others by accepting vulnerabilities as well. Learning that you're wrong or not. Now that had a 40% drop. That group who went through that, then they surveyed their employees, and the people who lacked support dropped by 40%.
Wow.
People were more likely, talking about remote work, about the 6 percentage point increase of people who wanted to come back to the office fully. Because part of why people don't want to go back to work is because it sucks.
They don't want
to it's actually better. The microaggressions are much less extreme on Zoom than when you're together. So what that organization, those companies then in Turkey saw that as like, if you actually change managers' behavior to be a more trusting, respectful, less toxic environment, then had all those positive effects on the engagement level of the employees. And as a result, then, they were also more profitable, because that's, this healthy, trusting relationship actually leads to business success as a result.
And that's what they want to see. That's what all the CEOs, the managers want to see. So Stephan, how can people get the book? I'm guessing Amazon, all good booksellers near you.
Yeah, I mean, hopefully every physical bookstore that is. If not, you should boycott it. But like Amazon is probably the best way. And then they can also, have this monthly newsletter where I actually send some of those Lego movies. Each time there's a new Lego movie that comes with the newsletter, where I talk about like the human-centric future of work, or my thoughts about. It's not just about the book, but the related topics about human-centric future of work.
I have to check out these Lego movies
Well,
now.
I think when you come back next time, if you'd be so kind as to come back another time and talk about unpack some of these other concepts you have here, maybe in that stage you can explain to us why the Lego
I
angle.
can talk about Legos all day long.
Okay, all right. Maybe we'll do that another time if you're up for that. But Stephan, thank you so much. It's been so insightful, inspirational. I'm sure there are many people out there. Well, we know there are many people out there who still have questions in this space, and you've already gone a long way to addressing some of those. So thank you for that.
Yeah. Future of work. I love it. Employee-centric, the employee advantage. So the link to the book will be in the show notes as well as the link to your website. But that just leaves us to say thank you so much for making the time, for answering my message on LinkedIn saying, I got your book, I want to talk. And,
thank you so much for having me, Andrea and John. That was a lovely, super interesting conversation. Thank you.
Our pleasure. And from us to the audience, for this podcast, we say it's a wrap. Thank you for being here.
Look forward to the next time. Bye-bye.
Yeah.
We hope you enjoyed that episode. And if you did, and you want to hear more, the best thing to do is subscribe. Then you'll never miss an episode. There's a new one every Friday. You can stay connected with us on social media at The 4 Habits for updates, behind-the-scenes content, and to participate in discussions related to the show. We always love to hear from you. And of course, if you've enjoyed this podcast, please leave us a review on your preferred platform to allow us to reach more listeners and help people around the globe radically transform the way they do relationships so they too can enjoy better harmony at home, thrive at work, and win at life.